Hello? Hello, yes, yes. Welcome. Welcome. Okay, so everyone, if you can hear my voice, that means you're invited to sit in on these panels. So if you can hear it, come in, grab a seat. Don't be shy. Oh, let me work on the mic. How's everybody doing? Good. Thank you. All right, so good afternoon and welcome to the 2019 Future Automotive Career Expo. Each year, Detroit welcomes thousands of talented professionals and thought leaders to the North American International Auto Show. We thought it just made sense to create a space that focused on connecting talented people like yourselves with prospective high-tech employers and professional development experts. So thank you for joining us today. So at this time, we would like to invite our opening panel to come forward and begin our session. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Elena Farnsworth, CEO of The Next Education.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you today?
Sitting at the far end, right?
Oh, good. So I am going to introduce an esteemed panel we've got various backgrounds from engineering to education to executive levels. And I'm going to ask them to come up and have a seat. And I'm going to have a seat with them because we want this to be an interactive discussion on talent. And that's what we're focused on right now is the future workforce and the talent we need to support this new industry of autonomy, connectivity, and smart cities. So I'd like to ask my guests to come and have a seat, and we're going to have an introduction shortly. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves. Yeah.
John. He mic'd me first, so I'm there.
Oh, you want me?
You're on the other end.
This is the fun part.
Thank you. I guess you and I are.
Which order?
Okay.
You were mic'd, yeah. There we go.
Yeah, sit next to you. There we.
It's going to be a quick.
There were no place cards, so we
No,
had to figure it
right.
out.
And we didn't rehearse.
There you go. So I'd like to welcome my guests. And again, my name is Elena Farnsworth, and I'm the CEO of The Next Education. And The Next Education, we focus on the future workforce. But we do something unique in that we invite industry and educators, and we invite all sorts of people to join in on helping promote and recruit talent. So I'm going to ask my panelists today to introduce themselves, because you can share about yourselves a lot more than I can. So let's give an introduction one by one.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is John Bukovich. I'm president of the Liaise Group. We're an executive search firm, and we focus within the automotive and IoT industries. So we are global, and I've been doing search for, let's see, probably about 27 years now.
Perfect.
I'm Bob Charavelli. I founded Strategic Labor and Human Resources about 20 years ago. I'm a practicing labor lawyer, and I've been thinking about HR and HR-related stuff for about the last 40 years.
Good afternoon. I'm Rose Belanca. I'm the president of Washtenaw Community College in Ann Arbor, Michigan. One of our areas of expertise, in addition to the transfer program, is we are very focused in the area of mobility, and we have invested over $10 million in redoing our entire area. So I'm looking forward to answering any questions you might have in that regard.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe LaRussa. I'm the Director of Industrial Engineering for Broza North America. Broza is a automotive mechatronics solutions manufacturer. Every time you roll down your window or adjust your seat, think of me. And shameless plug for those of you who are on the lookout, I have one of our colleagues from HR, from recruiting, Joe Esho, is with me today. So make sure you make a connection with him before you leave today, because we are looking for good people and I am hiring.
Thank you, panelists, for that great introduction. Now, because Joe stepped out on a limb, I'm going to start with him. I want this to be an interactive panel, though. So even though I'm going to ask the question specifically to start, let's talk about it. Because that's really what I think is missing, that interaction, that conversation. And Joe very well said, oh, we're hiring. And that's what we're hearing everywhere. Now, we're hiring, so here's the question. What gaps exist in the knowledge and skills and abilities that are required for the mobility professionals now and in the future?
Great question. So a lot of times the team members that we have, one of the big gaps I see is the technician level or technician layer of skill set. If you look at the competency model, particularly for manufacturing, we have a lot of good mechanical engineers, we have a lot of good electrical engineers, but they lack that real technician level skill set. A good example of this is when we're designing a piece of equipment to manufacture our products, we're looking for a solution that's cost effective from an investment perspective. And many times the requirement set that we get includes drawings for our components. And those drawings, if you can't read those and understand what those mean, right, it just drives up the cost of the solution because we end up over-designing our equipment to manufacture our products. And there was one case where we avoided about $60,000 worth of expense because we had the right person who could interpret the requirements and then transfer that knowledge into the design of the machine. The other gap I would say that I've noticed is really as manufacturing continues to converge with computer science and software development, many of our engineers not only need to come with a good mechatronic skill set, the hardware side, they also need to be thinking about software. Our machinery and equipment has more software baked into it now than it ever has, and we will spend an excruciating amount of time on every threaded bolt that holds the thing together, or every piece of tooling that has to be manufactured, but we will give short shrift in a lot of cases to the amount of software and the quality of that software to run that machine. And 80% of our debug is spent modifying software to get sequencing right, get things done on the shop floor. So those would be the two big ones. You know, the convergence of manufacturing with computer science and then that technician level skill set to really equip our engineers to give good feedback.
So Joe, let me expand on that a little bit, and then I'm going to open it up to the rest of the panel. I love that you're using the word mechatronics, but how many of you in the audience would go to, when you got your degree or before you went to school, would you go to your counselor and say, hey, how do I get into mechatronics? Any of you? So that's interesting, and
Sure.
that I believe it's also the naming conventions and the different jobs that are out there that are really a little bit confusing. Now, do you find that, and can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and it extends even more because industrial engineers at Broza are actually a combined asset, a combined resource. The traditional industrial engineering discipline focuses on operational excellence, right? Time studies, layout, and really my engineers are also given a heavy dose of manufacturing science on how to make things, forming, threaded fastener, welding, manufacturing science, and the traditional industrial engineering discipline. But back to the question, when it comes to mechatronics, think of it as a generalist, someone who can work with pneumatic systems, electronic systems, mechanical systems, and they have a more general skill set as opposed to a depth skill set. So, right, where I might go to a hospital and see a neurosurgeon or a cardiovascular specialist, we need more general surgery people. who can do spleens and do repair an artery and things like this. So I would say the mechatronics discipline is emerging. If you are looking for more information about it, you can look at Skills USA, you can look at some of the community colleges. They focus on this area specifically to try to broaden the skill set out of the traditional chimnified electrical, mechanical, industrial, computer science. Really, it's more a horizontal discipline.
Yes, Dr. Blanca, this is
Thank
almost
you.
a segue
I appreciate
to you.
that. Actually, we're working with Rosa. Our Washtenaw Community College is working with your company. But one of the areas that you mentioned is the technician, and you asked the question, how many individuals, or did anyone in this audience study mechatronics or even think about it? So that's where community colleges come into play. We offer, seriously, short, skill-specific training. So if you are an engineer and you've decided that you need to have some technician training and you want it quick and you want it quality and you don't want to spend a fortune to get it, then I would highly recommend your community college. And of course, in particular, Washtenaw, we're at UA 11 if you'd like to stop by, because we have a list of all those technician positions that you're talking about, and most people don't even know exist.
So again, you'll find on my panels, sometimes I like to just bring you into a different conversation
Sure,
as
that's
well.
fine.
So do you, because as a community college, that is fantastic, because you said it's a shorter cycle for educating. Do you also see that you stack credentials, or that you bring certain credentials to bear that people may or may not know about?
Yes, absolutely. So the stack credentialing is really the whole system of credentialing now. You really, if you stop by and look at the vehicle that we have in at UA 11, this is not a commercial, but you will see that that vehicle was actually developed by software engineers, by a multitude of, multiple different areas of advanced technology. Not necessarily, as you mentioned, it is the generalist with specialized areas in different component parts. So absolutely, the stackable credentials are more valuable. And of course, you're never going to stop learning now. That is over. Whatever.
Lifetime learning.
It's done. Yeah, that
right.
is done. So
Yes.
we'll be doing this for a long time together.
Well, Bob, would you like to take any of this conversation? Because it's a long one.
Well, not in from the perspective of the law, but in every organization there's an HR architecture. And this is a strategic issue. You might be looking for the CEO or some other C-level executive. You might be looking for your next great engineer, or you might be looking for somebody in the organization lower down organizationally that is at such a critical shortage that it becomes a strategic issue. And so I wouldn't want anybody to miss the point that no matter what your organization is, there is an HR structure to it, and there's a strategy associated with it. If you were going to reform your company from a finance, you'd go to the finance department and ask for a finance strategy. If it was marketing, you'd go to marketing. In the people-related areas, the architecture and the strategy comes from the subject matter experts in HR. And I do want to do a short call out. One of my colleagues from NEMAC, Denise Dorigo-Jones, just to make sure I was getting some of this right, I tapped her on the shoulder, and I think NEMAC has some great HR structures for finding out where their shortages are and how to strategically nurture, place, attract, and retain.
Well, as I open the conversation, again, here's one of the things that, and you're going to be helpful in this next comment that I make. But from an HR perspective, a lot of times we see a disconnect between what the universities may be hearing and what the jobs that are posted may be saying and what the executives that really need the talent are actually asking for. Do you see this as a problem regularly, and how do you get through that as an HR professional?
So there's probably a little more art than science in this.
Okay.
And I think what you need to do, you have to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in your market. From an HR standpoint, we want to make sure that the hires we make our companies more dominant in the marketplace and minimize the risk of any kind of liability. So by going to conferences like this, by being engaged with the universities, by understanding what the functional leaders in your organization are doing, you can build some type of structure or strategy for understanding what the current critical need is and what it might be 2 or 3 years from now. And I think what we've seen in these markets is the disruption is happening at such a quick pace that predicting the future is becoming more and more difficult.
Well, this is a perfect segue now to John, because John, from an executive perspective and from your perspective, what are you seeing out there?
So for clarification, our firm in terms of search will start at a middle management level, but we do a lot of work C-level VPs. So we're dealing with the leadership issues of an organization. And all of this layers a very good discussion in terms of what the executive leaders are facing in terms of the convergence of two significant corporate cultures or industries, I should say, automotive and technology. So you have different behaviors, you have different organizational development designs, you have different paces in terms of technological development and product development, and all of these significant issues at the top stem from the details that we're talking about, starting with the foundation of the organization. Combine that with the fact that it's just not two industries converging,
right,
but it's a global culture. We, of course, recognize the advance of China in the industry. It's very evident today in terms of all the additional cultural developments. And this integration, it creates a lot of complexity. And I'll throw one more thing in there that makes another challenge, and that is the landscape has changed. We no longer have traditional large OEMs, but we have all these startups. A startup culture is very unique, and it's unique because of the fact that the talent you typically want to bring on board, you're trying to identify technical depth, but you're bringing them into an organization that they need to have a holistic understanding of management and HR and marketing, simply because it's a small team that needs to move very fast. And then, of course, that organization needs to build upon itself, and all of these people tend to get pulled into a decision. So it challenges a lot of folks, and that's one of the things that makes it difficult. It's not always sometimes that the technical talent's not available, it's the technical talent that's going to assimilate within your culture.
So
and
John,
quickly.
yeah, so one of the things that I've seen, and if you have some use case or discussion around this, is that there's been several acquisitions, and we're seeing a lot of acquisitions in the market. And traditionally, let's just say, technology startup is a lot more fluid than all of the regulations and quality management that you need to be able to be in traditional auto. So are you seeing that this is causing some disconnect with organizations that are merging together to try to make one big happy family?
Yes, clearly. And the interesting thing, if you do case studies of acquisitions, you'll tend to see which becomes the dominant culture. It takes a couple of years, but that becomes rather evident. The other interesting thing when you get into, again, the technical aspects, and this isn't often recognized, but it becomes a very difficult obstacle. And that's when you start getting into these highly technical markets, you get into non-compete issues. So then it's not a question of who you want, it's how do you get them and how do you transition that. So these things become a little more evident when you start getting into the middle management levels, but nonetheless, even at engineering levels, I'm sure there's a lot of protection in terms of IP, and it just adds another layer of challenge to the already difficult process of not just identification, but then the recruitment process.
So I had a list of questions, and because sometimes I go into different areas, one of the questions was, which you nicely teed up for Bob, is because there's such a shortage of talent. We often see, we were talking about this before the panel, we often see each other all in different international capacities. We all speak on different shows and all over the world. But that's kind of what we're seeing with talent. There's groups and pools of talent, and a lot of people are kind of pulling from those groups. So Bob, how do you get talent that is so scarce to move and to become part of your organization? Help me.
So
here.
we wrote an article on this in October, Detroit meets Silicon Valley. And for anybody that would like a copy of that article, just give me your credit card.
And Social Security number.
Yes, your business card.
Apple Pay.
And I'll get it to you. But here's what we find. And I'm going to use two metaphors. One hopefully will resonate with you. the metaphor of building a great baseball team, or maybe the metaphor of who's going to be on the bus, right? You're going to have critical players there. And you have to understand that those critical players have certain basic concerns. From the general manager's standpoint, that's the automotive supplier, they have to find out where they are. So they may be in related fields, they may be in automotive fields that are doing really innovative things, or they might be doing some critical missions that you really need within your organization. We have conferences like this, and we have a bunch of feeder places. It might be LinkedIn, it might be the best universities. We have to realize that this critical talent, if they're not in general management, they're going to be concerned about a couple things. And what we found is, number one, they are risk averse. They do not want to leave a job that they might find interesting and go elsewhere and risk something going wrong. So there's, I don't know if this is myth or not, but I was told when Ford was looking for Mullally, they took this chief HR officer and they said, you go get Mullally and don't come back until you have him. Okay, so you have to take somebody who's doing well in a career. It could be an engineer or any of these other areas, and you have to make sure that they don't react adversely to the issue of risk. Secondly, in the technical areas or in the individual contributor areas, people want to make a difference. So they have to see how the job they're going to is going to be exciting. We've all heard about the tech people wanting to change the world. Well, we're changing the world in automotive. And they may be working someplace right now where they are doing something very exciting. And they're not going to leave that without saying, oh boy, I can really develop my career, I can really dive into something. And then lastly, we know of all of the horror stories that go through their head. Do any of these companies ring a bell? Karma, Fisker, DeLorean, great projects. But if you have critical talent that you want to bring, and they're thinking it might end up in that heap of failures, you're going to have a hard time attracting them. So I think it's realizing they have to do something that they find engaging, and they have to do something that deals with their adverse nature to risk.
Joe, I see you nodding your head. Go for it.
Yeah, so
jump right in.
I mean, first I'll echo some of Bob's comments. So when I'm communicating with my team or with a candidate, you know, we don't talk about making widgets. We don't talk about making machinery. We talk about how the stuff we make is keeping people safe in their car. And that goes for whether you're making a seat, whether you're making a headlight, whether you're making a seatbelt, whatever. What I focus on is the bigger picture, and that's our products are keeping people safe in their vehicles. And that resonates so much more with a potential candidate and with my team, and it motivates them to stay the extra hour, to make sure that their homework's double checked, to make sure that their stuff is done to a level of quality, because they understand the impact that their work is having on the end consumer. Making that connection is something that I don't think a lot of, and I'll pull the curtain back now on part two and say, I don't feel like a lot of my colleagues in the middle management structure, or even at the first line supervision level, are as effective at that as they need to be. Especially in a talent pool that's as competitive as we swim in now. The differentiation is making people's work meaningful. And so for me, one of the things that I do to develop myself and what I counsel my colleagues in is that, you know what, yeah, I used to be a really good engineer. Now I need to figure out how to motivate people. Because if I don't do that, I can't do the work that my people are doing. There's no way. I can't cover all that detail, even though I have the skills for it. And that's the other piece, is I have to identify the skills. Do I really need an automotive person with 3 to 5 years of experience, or do I need somebody who has experience in a technology domain, fastening, welding, stamping, forming, whatever, right? And they've brought in a piece of capital equipment, no matter how small. Could be a gauge, could be a small machine, could be a manual workstation. If they understand the procurement process for a piece of equipment, and they know something about the science of how we make our things, then I can teach them the rest. Because anybody who's spent more than 15 minutes in an automotive company knows we've got an instruction for everything. You know, we'll teach you the rest. But if you know the tech and you've ever procured anything for a shop, you've got the minimum that I would say is required for you to function well in the organization, and we teach you the rest.
You know, John, John, I'm going to ask you to expand on this, but I want those of you who are in this audience that are wondering, how do I get a job in this field? Pay close attention to that. And those of you that are out there that are hiring people in this field, I also want you to pay close attention to that, because it is the ability to be agile and to be able to say, we want the person that has the aptitude to learn our process.
Yep.
As opposed to, we want everybody to have the same blanket skill set. So, John, I'm going to ask you to expand on that, and then you, Rose, because
Sure.
I think that that's a good.
So this brings up an interesting point in that when we talk about the automotive and technology industries merging, one of the things that we saw, let's just say, when we came out of the recession, there was, and then along with technology finding its way into automotive, there was this idea of cross-border relationships, not just so much from a global perspective, but cross-border from an industry perspective. So now for HR professionals, it created a new challenge. The automotive industry was highly incestuous, right? So it was real easy to take somebody from another supplier or an OEM because they traditionally understood the industry.
Right.
When you go outside the industry, and earlier when you were talking about just the identification of engineers and what they do. See, the nomenclature changed. It's no longer the same name, the same label.
At all.
So the HR group has this responsibility to educate. The disciplines within the organization have the responsibility to hype up, what's the value proposition of someone coming over. And then that brings another, take for instance, we hear a lot about Silicon Valley and the recruitment that we'll do. These are folks that have no understanding of a hard product. It's software. And everybody takes for granted, oh yes, it's real easy. No, that transition is really quite complicated for a lot of folks. So you have to explain what the end game is, you have to acknowledge the risk assessment. With startups, they sound real sexy, but what happens when the money runs out? And now we're facing that period, after 3-4 years of a lot of hoopla. Now you have organizations that really need to identify their sustainability and say, okay, we're going to survive for the next 3 years, and that's why we'd like to bring you on board. But that, again, that's challenging. And sometimes that gets lost in the process. And I think that's been a challenge for the HR team working with the internal group and the internal disciplines as far as specific hiring.
For sure.
And Rose,
sorry.
All right. No, I was going to say, because Rose, this is going to be a huge problem for you, because your teaching and your organization has all of these disciplines. How are you preparing students for this?
We've made a huge shift at Washtenaw Community College in that we know that industry and education, we have the same mission. We're both the same. I mean, you want someone who can work and has a skill set that they need. We need to know what that skill set is. So rather than coming to us and we say, this is what we do, here you go. We come to you and we ask you, what do you want? What do you need? Tell us the skill set. If we don't have that instructor, we'll find one. So that's a whole different way that that education is looking at how to provide that training that you need, and being very, very nimble. But can I ask the group a question?
Of course.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Here,
This trend. I'm just curious.
Really, yes.
So this trend that you're seeing about risk aversion, and is that something that has to do with our state? Or is that something that you see across the country? I'm just really curious.
It's internationally.
It's international?
There's a greater sensitivity amongst cultures as well. So again, as we blend cultures and greater migrations of talent from unique places, even we have a client based out of Moscow. And so when you understand what's going on there and the potential of taking that talent and eventually bringing it to other parts of the world based on where they want to set up research offices and so forth, even that creates another uniqueness in terms of the talent exchange.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And it extends all the way down to the operator level too, because if I'm going to put a manufacturing facility in a location, and I want to transfer knowledge from the existing production network to that new location, sounds pretty easy on paper, right? I take the best from around the world where I'm doing production, I put them in there, the launch team, and we're going to launch this new plant, but it's lost on them about, yeah, they're the most knowledgeable resources that we have, but they have to not only transfer their knowledge, they have to ramp up a whole new group of people who don't know what the inside of that company looks like, and they have to inculcate them with the culture as well as the knowledge. And that's the piece that I think really challenges us on the production floor, is our operators in different regions, you know, they come from a similar knowledge base, but culturally, I mean, it's very different. I mean, they're especially our European colleagues, when we say, well, wait a minute, we're still working here. Yep, well, 6 o'clock. And I'm like, yeah, but we got to make parts. No, it's 6 o'clock and we'll see you tomorrow. You know, and that's a big culture shock for expats, and Broza has a lot of them. It's a big shock when you come from an environment, you know, when I work in Coburg or Würzburg and I can shoot a cannon off at 5:30 and not hit a soul, you know, whereas I'm still at my desk at 7:30, you know, in the shop. You know, that's just how it is. So it's very true. The cultural eat your strategy for lunch. It's an axiom that rings true even today. So,
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Please.
you know, we're talking about risk from the standpoint of the candidate.
That's right.
But what this suggests is that there's substantial risk for the organization.
That's correct.
Not only are you basing a future on the skills you're bringing in, what are the innovations, how are they going to deal with disruption, but when that goes badly, or when you spend too much in that area, it challenges the viability of the organization. And we see this in merger and acquisition, when you don't go in with strong concepts around building your human structure, your human architecture. We also see it when we have old structures and compensation systems that don't address the kind of talent that's coming in. Something as simple as you bring in an expensive person and it screws up your compensation system.
Right.
All of that is a risk, not only for the individual, but let's not forget, as we want to become more dominant in the market through our talent, we also want to manage or minimize that risk or liability that the organization takes on through its own choices.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but I have heard quite just recently people make reference to talent is the new currency. So you know when you're an organization and you're looking to attract people, in order for you to be successful as a company, you have to have good talent. So as this industry, are we really unique? Because we all say, oh, we're unique, and I think we are. But this is going to start with you, Joe. Are we really unique? And for those of you that are interested in getting a job in this industry, what are the skills that they need to fall into this unique or not unique industry?
So my perch on the manufacturing side of the business, I would say it's a little bit less about uniqueness, because in automotive manufacturing, we like to think that our products are special and we make them better than everybody else, and that our systems for developing processes are better than everybody else's. And in some cases, they are. From a tooling perspective, I would say that's the case. But when it comes to operational excellence, whether it's lean manufacturing or whether it's value stream management, I think that looking outside really adds something, and we have to acknowledge and eat a little bit of humble pie sometimes, because aerospace, medical device, people who deal in higher precision or higher safety critical applications have something that we can learn from. So I would say in the shop floor, there is a benefit to kind of humbling ourselves a little bit and saying, somebody's probably figured this out and we need to figure out where that is and go find it. I think on the product development side, that's where I think there's a little bit more of a bespoke nature to it, because we are crafting product that is providing a mobility benefit, but also bringing in these experiential elements of using, consuming your content in your vehicle, communicating with your friends and family from your vehicle. So it's not just about the utility of the mobility solution anymore. It's about your experience while you're mobile and being productive and all these things that you're reading about in the megatrends of the future of mobility. So I would say product, yes, it's a little bit more bespoke. On the shop floor, I spend a lot of time with my team going to other places and taking shop floor tours at other manufacturers who I've found have a nugget that we need.
Rose, can you expand on that?
Yes, well, I'm going to go back to your original question, which was what skills does an applicant, if you're, what do we need today, right? I would say it is an individual that has the ability to learn, that knows how they learn, realizes they need to continue learning, and has that ability to learn. And I believe the workforce today is, I don't want an expert that thinks they're an expert forever. You're an expert the day you're hired. After that, it's good. You got to stay there. So I believe that ability to learn is incumbent upon all of us. So that's what I would say is a very strong skill set.
Good point. Bob?
So I'm going to take it from a slightly different standpoint.
Okay.
When I talk to our clients about their talent acquisition strategies, the first thing that comes up is retaining the talent they have.
Ooh,
if you bring in a flood of new talent and in the process you lose talent, you're potentially in a deficit mode. So number one, what is your organization doing to keep its great talent?
The retention strategy.
Retention strategy. In the last quarter of 2018, we surveyed C-level executives in the automotive industry. And what they said, their challenges for 2018 and 2019 were around disruption and agility. The second question we asked them is, what is their confidence level in their human resource leadership and department around these? And in the area of talent acquisition, the C-level executives scored their HR leaders and HR talent very poorly.
Ouch.
That's a big ouch.
Yeah.
And so when you have an organization that knows what the future holds, disruption and agility, and you want to create a pipeline for bringing talent in and keeping the talent you have, you're going to have to ask a lot more of your HR leadership, C-level executives, CEOs, CFOs. You're going to really have to challenge your HR leadership and your HR departments to do much, much more.
Are they going to be on board with that?
I think every professional in the area has a certain jeopardy, and we are much less amenable to people just doing a job in a mediocre way, and we should be challenging every function to do it at the highest level.
John, would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Excuse me. So traditional employment advancement was very linear when you kind of study it decades ago. We have a millennial culture that gets beat up often. I'd like to sort of give them a little bit of praise in that I think with the ability to multitask, that's preparing them for an environment where they need to do just that. It's just that, Rose, to your point in terms of the training, it's now training them to understand that they really need to understand a lot of things and maybe become good at one, but they still need to get that more holistic perspective. And that's very true with startups. And then, of course, when we talk about talent retention, it is interesting because sometimes there's not enough focus on the development of the existing talent, and more often, let's go out to find it. The other challenge HR has now is when you do these crossover to other industries, and we were talking about compensation, that's another major barrier. So you take a traditional automotive role, and you're going to Silicon Valley, where 80% of the roles, let's say that we'll deal with, have stock option packages, and then you tell them that maybe that doesn't exist. That's an immediate wall that goes up that you have to learn to break down or jump over. So the understanding of market value presents a challenge. And then once you bring the talent on board, the cost of retention, and that's a prioritization of resources, which then from a strategic level, you constantly have to evaluate and say, okay, should we really be spending money here when we should be spending it here, which is really a retention of existing talent. So again, it just creates another level of complexity, and these are the wonderful challenges we're facing.
And John, you make a great point, because that's something that a lot of the times I hear, and when I speak, we hear all the time. We got to get new talent. We got to get new talent. But one of the things that I don't think is said enough is we have to look at the talent we have, not only retaining them, but let's allow them to get another skill set. Let's upskill and let's retrain them to fit into jobs that frankly don't even exist yet. There are things that are coming down the pipe in the next 5 years we can't even identify with a labor code because they don't exist yet. And so that's one of the things that we need to focus on, I believe, as an industry is getting the new talent, but also keeping the talent we have and getting them to where they need to be in order to support the jobs that are there. So I do want to save time for questions, and I want the panelists to be able to give a last thought. So I'm going to open up the floor right now for anyone that has questions for anybody on the panel. Do we have any questions? Okay, we have one in the back. Do we have a microphone for that? Okay, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
The question was, with experience, is it that one doesn't gain experience until they're hired?
Mm.
Yeah, well, that's my question. Like, I learned another is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like we really don't need to skin the cat. And my name is Sylvester Brownsville, Martinez. But I learned it from a different way. I learned it just by doing the same thing you're doing.
So Rose, yeah. So how do you get that?
How do you get
Experience
How do you-
outside of working in the job?
outside of working in the job? Well, I would highly recommend, what I would tell people that ask me this, my own employees, is go and find it through other ways. So, I mean, volunteer at different organizations or, if there's some way. But experience, your school, I have to go back to short-term training.
So,
I need to go back to that. If you have your employer, hopefully you have a great employer that wants to invest in you, so they're going to encourage you to continue learning, but don't depend on them. You're in charge. You are your own CEO. You're it.
great.
You're it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Joe, you wanted to.
Well, I
expand
think
on that.
he's trying to clarify his question, or
I'm
maybe
sorry,
as a follow-up.
yeah.
No, not at all.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I like this me, I learned it good and bad, almost like how this world is, because I learned that how to get flexible with happiness and what's good with the contract honesty.
Yeah,
I can't.
I ain't perfect, I put myself in it.
sure.
I'm just trying to make my time useful with the time he's giving me to
Yeah.
make it better for everyone.
Right.
Yeah, so I can share a quick story about the acquisition of skill. So, when I was looking for I was looking to break into the management level, right? I had done what I'd done. I had the t-shirt, I had the hat, I had it all. And I was like, I wanted my first project management job. And I got feedback from my boss at the time, LaRussa, you're a good engineer, but you've never managed timing, you've never managed a budget, and we're not gonna take the risk. I said, okay. So I was serving in one of my professional organizations at the time, Society of Manufacturing Engineers.
That's it.
And they had a role to help their local chapters get better because some of them weren't doing so well. They weren't very healthy. And they said, well, this person will have to manage goals and a budget and some timing. And I was like, hey, that sounds like what I need. So I said I would take on that role. And 2 years later, I reapplied for a project management role. I got the same feedback. LaRussa, we've had this discussion. And I said, well, did you look at the other page of my resume where I've got this volunteer stuff? I said, yeah, that volunteer stuff. Well, I said, I managed timing, I managed a budget. And they said, well, how much budget did you manage? And it was, compared to automotive, it was like a nickel. But I said, these people took more risk on me giving me $5,000 to manage than you were willing to take 2 years ago when I came to you the first time. I got the gig the second time around. So you have to be as resourceful outside of work as you are at work to find the opportunities to round out your skill profile.
That's well
Okay.
said.
Matt?
So I got a question for the HR guys. Could be for you two as well. But mostly for the HR. So we heard at the beginning of the show at the start of the week that it's about the skills you have, not about the degree you have, which is what you're saying. What Joan goes with transferring Washington County. From an HR perspective, how are you viewing when someone walks in that they've got this unique, strange background, and maybe they've got a credential or a certificate, but traditional HR has still got, 8 years ago, they created this matrix of what you've got to check off the box before you do. So how is that evolving to look at people that are simply getting credentialed with a specific skill set that Rosa might want, and how is HR catching up with that? How do you prepare those people?
The question for you that can't hear Matt is that there was traditionally a checkbox for HR, but how is HR handling the skills and the lack of experience, and how is that being handled now in a different way?
Okay.
John?
I still have to be sensitive to the fact that given the nature of what we do, there's, I'll say, a level of pedigree in terms of education, talent. If you were to ask me, what do I see in the next 10 to 15 years? I do see a leniency in terms of what will be the interpretation of education. Will it be degree specific? If so, there's a leniency now in some cases where we have people that are running organizations that 10 years ago somebody would have said you must have an engineering background to be able to take on this responsibility. Now they're sitting back and saying, you've had functional experience within an engineering area. We're willing to acknowledge that. That trend will most likely continue. Also, when Rose was highlighting, I really appreciate what's being done in terms of changes in our academic system, where we agree that, you know, not everyone might need a bachelor's, but we have to prepare ourselves for certificates, some level of specialization. It doesn't have to be technical, but I just say specialization that differentiates yourself, prepares you for a market, and again, going back to agility. But the responsibility still comes upon the individual. But to answer your question directly, I'm hopeful that within the next 15 years, in terms of what we do, it's still very concentrated in terms of this is what we need. And again, because the investment, the risk, everything is put on the strategic leaders that we're working with.
Bob, do you want to expand?
I do think education and diplomas and certifications are absolutely essential. I do not subscribe to the fact that those type of credentials have a lesser place in our architecture, right? You're not going to hire a physicist if he doesn't know quantum mechanics. You're not going to hire a language interpreter unless he can speak the language fluently. So getting back to the fundamentals of HR, you have to look at what the need is, what the competencies are from a behavioral standpoint, and what the competencies are from a technical standpoint. We have so many opportunities to build credentials, whether it's through the community college system, whether it's through the four-year universities, whether it's through online. And what I would recommend to anybody who wants to advance their career is to understand that the workplace of the future is going to be lifelong learning. And the only way to really evidence that is through a certificate or a credential. Now, I use the example of if you're going to be a foreign language interpreter, maybe if you just step in front of the committee that assesses it, you speak fluently. But in so many other areas, I wouldn't want a lawyer that didn't have a law degree.
But, okay, so Bob, I'm going to give just one more minute to Patrick. There was a question up here, and then we're going to wrap it up because we are almost out of time. What was your question?
Just a quick question. It's amazing event. It's great to hear all these different perspectives.
Patrick says we're amazing.
But one thing that I'm curious about your opinion is that we have here about so the need for quick skill training and so on, and being practical, and not only focus on the big 4-year degrees and so on, even though of course the certification is important. And also we hear that in automobility you have instructions for everything. That's also great. But millennials and new generations, they learn in a very different way. Right? So they go online, they go to YouTube to watch how-to videos. They don't have patience to read a 40-page book to try to find something. So I'm curious from your perspective, is there a need for changing or updating a little bit how training is delivered?
So may I ask a question, because we're going to do this, we only have a few seconds left. Can you answer that question and give your final thought from the panel today of what you would like people to remember about you, as well as answer the question too, how are we going to train people in a different way because people learn differently now? Joe? Start. I'm going to go this way.
No problem. That's for lead off. So to the question, yes, the learning modes are different, and content has to be rich enough that you're actually imparting a skill or a knowledge. Like, it's one thing to watch a video, right, about how it's made, but it's another thing entirely to then go do that. As anybody who has watched a how-to video to repair your stove or fix a leak in your sink, it's not as simple as, well, I watched the video, so now I'm going to go turn a wrench, especially on a high precision piece of equipment on the shop floor, number one. So I would say, yes, the learning modes are different, and those learning modes need to be complemented with the company's culture, right? I mean, if you're very process oriented and you have a way that you want things to be done and that's valued in the organization, you're just not a fit. Go work at Tesla, where make it happen, right? I don't care, right? It's, PPAP, what's that? Do those parts meet the print? Yep, ship them, right? So I would say there is a need for us to make sure that we're delivering high quality content to learners who consume that content, and make sure that you're actually imparting a skill or knowledge instead of just a visualization of how to do something. The final thought, sorry, go ahead.
Well, we're out of time.
Yep, sorry.
So here's what I'm going to have to do.
Go.
As opposed to a sentence, can each of you think of one word to leave this panel with? And I'll start. I think there's opportunity.
Can I give you 4 words?
4 words.
Okay, find a mentor and no substitute for hard work.
Challenge HR.
Ooh.
You work for yourself. You're a CEO at all times. You determine your destiny.
Joe, you get 1 word.
Persevere.
Good, there you go.
Please help in thanking my panel today. I think they did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
It was great.
I'm ready for it. Oh, no. I was doing the microphone. Please give another round of applause for Elena. She did a great job moderating that panel. A few housekeeping things. I want you all to know that they are giving away free headshots with a professional